Within the verdant embrace of Regency-era England, where the rhythmic echo of horse hooves resonates against the weathered cobblestone pathways leading to a magnificent country estate, each clip-clop reverberates through the morning mist like a gentle percussion, announcing the arrival of yet another visitor to this grand testament of wealth and aristocracy. The estate stands as the cherished home of His Grace, the Duke of Ravenswood, its imposing facade commanding respect from all who dare approach its hallowed grounds. The mansion's towering turrets stretch majestically toward the azure sky, their limestone surfaces catching the golden rays of dawn and casting long shadows across the meticulously maintained grounds. These elegant spires seem to pierce the very heavens themselves, as if reaching for something beyond mortal comprehension. Below, the gardens burst forth in a symphony of life, showcasing the meticulous artistry of skilled gardeners who have devoted countless hours to cultivating this living masterpiece. Roses in shades of deepest crimson and purest ivory climb along ornate trellises, while beds of lavender create purple ribbons that wind through carefully planned pathways. The sweet fragrance of lilacs mingles harmoniously with the intoxicating perfume of roses, creating an olfactory tapestry that seems to dance upon the gentle breeze. This natural perfume weaves seamlessly with the more earthly aroma of freshly baked pastries that drifts tantalizingly from the bustling kitchen windows, drawing servants and visitors alike toward the promise of culinary delights. The very air itself seems alive with possibility, thick with the mingled sense of prosperity and comfort that define the aristocratic way of life. As one ventures away from this lavish display of wealth and privilege, following a well-worn path that leads through a grove of ancient oak trees, the scenery undergoes a dramatic transformation. The opulent grandeur gradually gives way to the more humble yet equally captivating world of the working stable that lies nestled in a sheltered hollow nearby. Here, life flows to a different rhythm entirely, one governed not by the artificial constraints of society, but by the natural cycles of dawn and dusk, work and rest. The air in this rustic sanctuary carries the rich, honest aroma of fresh hay and well-oiled leather, scents that speak of honest labor and simple pleasures. These earthy fragrances mingle harmoniously with the gentle whinnies and soft nickering of magnificent horses, creating a symphony that embodies the elegant yet rugged world where physical labor transforms into something approaching artistry. Here, within these weathered wooden walls, duty becomes a dance of its own, each movement purposeful yet graceful. Amongst the aristocrats who dwell within the gilded embrace of such lavishness resides Lady Isadora Ashford, the spirited younger sister of His Grace, whose rebellious nature has long been the subject of whispered conversations among the most exclusive circles of high society. Her very name is spoken with a mixture of admiration and gentle scandal, for she represents something both enviable and dangerous to those who observe the rigid protocols of their elevated world. Isadora possesses a fiery spirit that burns like an untamed flame of independence, steadfastly refusing to be extinguished by the suffocating weight of societal expectations that press down upon young ladies of her station. Her chestnut hair cascades in lustrous waves like a waterfall of liquid silk, catching the light with each movement and framing a face that bears the unmistakable mark of someone who has never been content to remain safely indoors. Delicate freckles dust her nose and cheeks, each one a testament to her reckless abandon in seeking the warming touch of sunshine. Much to her governess's eternal dismay, her eyes as bright and verdant as the finest emeralds ever plucked from distant mines hold within their depths a constant yearning for something beyond the prescribed boundaries of her existence. These windows to her soul sparkle with mischief and determination, revealing her desperate desire to break free from the gilded cage of propriety that surrounds her like invisible prison bars. She hungers for authentic experiences, for adventures that exist far beyond the carefully choreographed world of drawing rooms and formal dinners, yearning for a taste of life that pulses with genuine emotion and unbridled passion. Standing in stark contrast to Lady Isadora's world of privilege dwells James Whitmore, the stable boy whose very presence seems to embody the virtues of honest work and quiet strength. His position may place him far below the lofty social heights occupied by the aristocracy, yet he carries himself with an innate dignity that commands respect from every soul who crosses his path. There exists about him an aura of competence and reliability that speaks volumes about his character. Qualities that transcend the artificial boundaries imposed by birth and circumstance. James possesses hands that tell the story of his life through their honest calluses. Yet these same weathered fingers display a remarkable gentleness when soothing even the most temperamental of horses. His touch seems to possess an almost magical quality, capable of calming the most restless stallion with nothing more than patient persistence and genuine affection. When he smiles, which he does often despite his humble circumstances, his entire countenance transforms with a warmth that could illuminate even the dimmest corners of the stable on the darkest winter evening. His tousled dark hair catches the morning light as it falls carelessly across his brow, giving him an appealingly disheveled appearance that speaks of someone more concerned with substance than style. His eyes reflect the brilliant blue of summer skies, holding within their depths secrets and dreams that reach far beyond the modest horizon of his current existence. Though fate may have placed him in service to others, James nurtures ambitions and hopes that burn as brightly as any nobleman's, dreams that whisper of possibilities yet unexplored. As destiny would weave its intricate pattern, a profound moment arrives to ignite the flames of this compelling tale. An inciting incident that sweeps the unsuspecting Lady Isadora into an emotional whirlwind that will forever alter the trajectory of her carefully planned existence. One particularly enchanting evening, while reluctantly attending a tedious gathering at the nearby village of Millbrook, she manages to slip away from the watchful eyes of her chaperone with the practiced skill of someone long accustomed to evading unwanted supervision. It is during this brief moment of stolen freedom that she discovers herself drawn by the infectious sounds of celebration drifting from the village green. There, bathed in the warm golden glow cast by dozens of paper lanterns strung between the ancient elm trees, she witnesses a festival of pure joy and uninhibited revelry. The scene unfolds before her like a living painting, filled with young villagers who dance with an abandon she has never been permitted to experience, their movements flowing like water as they celebrate the simple pleasure of being alive. Enraptured by this display of authentic emotion, Isadora watches from the shadows as couples twirl and spin beneath the delicate illumination, their laughter ringing through the cool evening air like silver bells. The rustle of simple cotton skirts mingles with the rhythmic stamping of boots upon the packed earth, creating a percussion that speaks directly to something wild and untamed within her carefully educated heart. In this transformative moment, surrounded by the joyous celebration of love, laughter, and an unquenchable thirst for freedom, Lady Isadora becomes utterly captivated by the intoxicating possibility of joining this dance herself. Her pulse quickens at the scandalous thought of abandoning propriety entirely, of allowing herself to be swept into the arms of someone who exists far below her elevated position in society's rigid hierarchy. The very notion ignites a dangerous desire within her breast, a yearning to embrace adventure and boldly challenge every constraint that has bound her since birth, regardless of the consequences that might follow such reckless abandon. As the moon hung low in the violet sky that evening, shrouded in gossamer clouds that drifted languidly across the heavens, like silk scarves cast upon a summer breeze, Isadora's heart raced with a potent mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. The very air seemed charged with possibility as she prepared to steal away from the grand confines of her family estate, where opulent balls and suffocating expectations weighed heavily upon her slender shoulders like chains wrought of gold and propriety. The drawing rooms below echoed with the distant murmur of her brother's guests, peers of the realm discussing matters of commerce and politics over brandy and cigars, their voices a constant reminder of the world that sought to claim her. But tonight she would escape it all. Disguised in a simple muslin gown of palest blue that rustled softly against her silk stockings as she moved, Isadora made her clandestine way through the servants' quarters and out into the night. The modest garment, borrowed from her lady's maid with careful persuasion and a promise of secrecy, felt strange against her skin, so different from the elaborate silks and satins that typically adorned her frame. The cobbled streets of the village stretched before her like a path to freedom, each stone worn smooth by countless footsteps of those who lived unencumbered by titles and expectations. The earthy scent of recent rain lingered in the cool air, mingling with the comforting aroma of warm bread that wafted from the bakery windows where golden light spilled onto the wet stones. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, its bronze voice carrying across the sleeping rooftops with solemn authority. With every stealthy step that carried her further from the imposing gates of her family's estate, Isadora relished the intoxicating thrill of her deception. How delicious it felt to embody the very essence of freedom, to walk among the common folk without the weight of her noble heritage pressing down upon her like a stone. The night air caressed her face with gentle fingers, and she breathed deeply, tasting liberty upon her tongue. Upon arriving at the lively gathering that had drawn her from her gilded cage, her eyes sparkled with genuine wonder as she observed the scene before her. The common folk moved with an ease she envied, their faces alight with unguarded joy and hearty laughter, completely unaware that a daughter of one of England's most prominent families walked among them. Lanterns strung between the ancient oak trees cast dancing shadows upon the grass, while the scent of honeysuckle and jasmine perfumed the warm evening air. It was then, as she stood at the edge of the merry crowd, that she caught sight of him. James emerged from the gathered revelers like a figure from her most cherished dreams, his presence striking her consciousness with the force of a swift summer breeze through sun-dappled leaves. He was undeniably handsome, with dark hair that caught the lamplight and intelligent eyes that seemed to hold depths she longed to explore. There was an easy charm about him that drew her in instantly, a natural grace that spoke of character rather than breeding. They found themselves drawn together as if by some invisible thread, engaging in quiet conversation that felt as natural as breathing. Beneath the flickering candlelight that illuminated their corner of the celebration, where shadows danced across their faces like living things, they shared their dreams and disappointments with a candor that surprised them both. "Do you ever tire of the expectations thrust upon you by others?" he asked, his voice carrying that gentle timbre she was already beginning to treasure, cutting through the joyful noise that surrounded them like a whispered confession. "Every single day," she replied without hesitation, a hint of rebellious mischief dancing in her dark eyes as she met his gaze steadily. "The weight of other people's assumptions can be suffocating, but tonight I am merely a spectator to life, free from the confines of whatever title or position others might assign me." A connection blossomed between them in that moment, tender and fragile as night-blooming jasmine, yet intoxicating in its unexpected intensity. As they delved deeper into shared frustrations, long-held hopes, and carefully guarded aspirations, Isadora found herself revealing thoughts she had never dared voice aloud. Their laughter rang out like the sweetest music amidst the revelry, while an undeniable attraction crackled in the air between them, like the first promising flicker of warmth from a candle newly lit against the cool evening breeze. When the musicians struck up a lively country dance and the villagers began to form sets upon the grass, James turned to her with eyes alight with playful daring. The violin's melody soared above the gentle murmur of conversation, while the steady rhythm of the drum seemed to match the quickening beat of her pulse. "Shall we dance?" he asked, extending his hand with a courtly grace that would not have been out of place in the finest London ballroom, though she suspected he had learned his manners through observation rather than instruction. A mischievous twinkle in his gaze made her heart leap like a startled sparrow. With her pulse quickening to match the tempo of the music, she placed her gloved palm against his work-roughened hand, marveling at the contrast between his calloused fingers and her own soft skin. Together they melded into the throng of dancers, spinning and dipping in a gleaming whirl of joyous festivity that made her forget, for precious moments, the constraints of her everyday existence. As they moved through the intricate steps of the dance, she became aware of curious glances cast in their direction. Whispers began to unfurl like ribbons in the evening breeze, carried from one group of onlookers to another with the swift efficiency of gossip. Watchful eyes assessed the curious sight of what appeared to be a lady of quality, dancing hand in hand with a man whose simple attire marked him as decidedly common-born. Of course, there would be speculation. There always was in their carefully ordered world, where every glance, every gesture, every unconventional choice had the power to ignite 1,000 tales. The very foundation of society seemed built upon such observations. catalogued and dissected until truth became indistinguishable from embellishment. Still, the music's embrace and the warmth of James's presence enveloped Isadora like a protective cloak, drawing her deeper into this daring moment of rebellion, even as the looming threat of detection by her brother's ever-watchful guards pricked at the edges of her consciousness like thorns among roses. The tension that surrounded her seemed almost a physical presence, blending with the music's rhythm and feeding a thrill that compelled her onward, despite wisdom's whispered warnings. Each turn, each shared smile, each moment of connection felt like a small victory against the forces that sought to dictate her every choice. Yet even as she reveled in her newfound freedom, she sensed that whispers regarding her unconventional behavior were already making their way back to her family's ears, each rumor growing sharper and more pointed than a newly forged blade. As their clandestine relationship deepened over subsequent stolen evenings, Isadora found herself captivated not merely by James's gentle demeanor and easy humor, but by the passionate dreams that seemed to illuminate him from within, like fireflies dancing on a warm summer's night. He spoke of aspirations that reached beyond his current circumstances, painting pictures with words that made her heart soar, even as they filled her with a bittersweet longing. One fateful evening, as they strolled together beneath a canopy of stars that seemed to bless their secret communion, he shared with her a confession that would change everything between them. The night air carried the scent of night-blooming cereus, and somewhere in the darkness, a nightingale sang its liquid song of love and loss. "I dream of leaving the stables behind me, Isadora," he stated, his voice imbued with a fierce determination that appeared so rare in their carefully circumscribed world. "I long to become an artist, to capture on canvas the beauty of the world as I see it, not as others tell me I should see it. Each sunset, each play of light upon water, each expression that crosses a human face, these things call to something deep within my soul. But with each passing day, the dream feels more distant, more impossible to achieve." Isadora's breath caught in her throat at his passionate declaration, her heart swelling with a complex mixture of pride in his noble aspirations and fear for the obstacles that lay before him. She recognized in his words an echo of her own desperate longing for freedom, for the right to choose her own path rather than follow the one laid out by birth and expectation. Yet even as she marveled at his courage in daring to dream beyond his station, she sensed an impending storm gathering on the horizon of their happiness, one encased in the rigid expectations of her brother, the Duke, and the unforgiving social order that governed their lives. Her intuition proved prophetic all too soon. Not a fortnight after that star-kissed evening, her brother confronted her in the sanctuary of her private sitting room, his expression a careful mixture of fraternal concern and stern aristocratic duty. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows seemed to highlight the gravity of his countenance as he positioned himself between her and the door, effectively trapping her within the confines of their conversation. "You must cease this reckless behavior immediately, Isadora," he warned, his tone carrying the weight of absolute authority tempered by genuine worry. "These reports of you consorting with common folk, and with one particular young man of questionable breeding, represent a grave threat to our family's reputation. Associating with such persons is not merely improper, it is an affront to the very honor our ancestors died to preserve. The potential for scandal grows with each passing day, and I fear we may already be balanced upon the precipice of social ruin." The weight of his carefully chosen words settled upon her shoulders like a heavy velvet cloak, and Isadora felt the formidable machinery of her societal position beginning to tighten about her like an inexorable vice. Yet despite the fear his warning kindled in her breast, her heart continued to beat with defiant rhythm for the man she had come to treasure above all considerations of rank or fortune. The Duke of Thornfield, a figure cloaked in authority and an unwavering sense of duty that had been forged through generations of noble bloodline, stood in the grand drawing room of his ancestral estate. His imposing presence commanded attention as he faced his beloved daughter, Isadora, across the expanse of Persian carpets that had been trod upon by kings and queens. The ample sunlight that poured through the tall, mullioned windows caught the hints of tension in the air, like dust motes dancing in golden beams, illuminating the silhouettes of fine Flemish tapestries and gilded frames that had witnessed countless family dramas throughout the centuries. The very atmosphere seemed to crackle with unspoken words as the Duke's steely gaze fixed upon his daughter. It had come to his attention, through whispers among the loyal staff who had served his family since before Isadora's birth, and the furtive glances of those in his social circle at the previous evening's soiree, that his precious daughter had been meeting with James, a man not merely of lower station, but someone whose very connection to their family posed a direct and dangerous threat to their esteemed reputation. The thought of it made his jaw clench with barely contained fury, the muscle twitching beneath his weathered skin like a warning bell. The Duke's voice, usually rich and measured, like aged wine poured from crystal decanters, now held an undercurrent of fury that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the house as he demanded, "Isadora, you must cease these secretive trysts at once." His words echoed off the ornate ceiling, past the cherubim carved in marble, who seemed to watch the confrontation with silent judgment. "Think of our family honor, child, and the standing we have held in the society for generations uncounted. You cannot, nay, you will not, throw it all away for a mere whim of youthful fancy." Each word that rolled off his tongue carried the weight of heavy stones cast into still water, creating ripples of consequence that would spread far beyond this room, accentuating the looming dread of the catastrophe that could unravel all their carefully woven social fabric. The very tapestries seemed to whisper of disgrace, and the ancestral portraits glared down with disapproving eyes. Yet despite the overwhelming force of her father's displeasure, Isadora drew herself up to her full height with a grace that would have made her departed mother proud. She felt the silk of her mourning gown brush against her skin like a caress of courage, her fingers unconsciously grasping the delicate Brussels lace of her sleeves as if drawing strength from their intricate beauty. In that profound moment of defiance that would forever alter the course of her life, her heart raced like a thoroughbred at Newmarket. Yet her resolve only strengthened like steel tempered in fire. "Father," she replied, her voice steady and clear as crystal bells ringing across the Yorkshire moors, each syllable carefully enunciated as if the very act of speaking out would reinforce her determination and give substance to her courage. "I refuse to be a pawn in a game of honor dictated by society's incessant and suffocating demands. I am not a chess piece to be moved at will across your board of social ambition." Her eyes, the same stormy blue as her mother's had been, flashed with an inner fire that surprised even herself. "I will forge my own path, dear Papa, one that may not lead to the advantageous alliances you envision in your grand design, but rather to something far more precious, to my own happiness, to the contentment of my own heart, and to a life lived on my own terms." The Duke's eyes narrowed to mere slits, his breath coming in controlled measures as he processed this unprecedented rebellion from his usually obedient daughter. For an agonizing moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, silence hung between them like an unsheathed sword glinting in the afternoon light, the air thick with the weight of their conflicting wills and the echoes of words that could never be taken back. The very grandfather clock in the corner seemed to tick with ominous portent, marking time until the inevitable explosion of paternal wrath that would surely follow such shocking insubordination. It was at the Duke's opulent estate, during the height of the afternoon's festivities, that fate chose to weave its most dramatic thread into the tapestry of scandal. The magnificent house, adorned with crystal chandeliers that caught and refracted the flickering candlelight into thousands of dancing rainbows, hosted some of the most influential members of the ton. The air hummed with genteel conversation and the rustle of silk gowns as the ladies moved through the grand hallways, like exotic birds displaying their plumage. The lush gardens beyond the French doors beckoned with their promise of privacy, vibrant with blooming roses, whose perfume mingled with the soothing scent of newly irrigated earth and the subtle fragrance of jasmine climbing the ancient stone walls. It was here, in a secluded corner where a marble fountain tinkled melodiously and climbing ivy created a natural bower, that Isadora and James had sought refuge from the watchful eyes of society, intent on the precious privacy it provided for their clandestine courtship. The afternoon sun dappled through the leaves above them, casting moving shadows across their faces as they spoke in hushed tones, their hearts racing with the thrill of forbidden romance. James's weathered hands, so different from the soft, manicured fingers of the gentleman Isadora was accustomed to, trembled slightly as he reached for hers. Just as they exchanged earnest glances filled with unspoken promises and whispered words of affection that seemed to float on the warm afternoon breeze like flower petals, fate chose that very moment to intervene with all the dramatic timing of a well-orchestrated theatrical performance. All at once, as if summoned by some malevolent spirit of mischief, a group of elegantly dressed guests from the highest echelons of the ton strolled past their hidden sanctuary. Their laughter rang through the carefully manicured gardens like silver bells, carrying with it the tart scent of the afternoon's unseasonably warm breeze and the unmistakable sound of refined voices discussing the latest on diets. Lady Pembroke led the group, her ostrich feathers bobbing with each animated gesture, followed by the notorious gossips Mrs. Whitmore and Lady Catherine Ashford. What had been meant as a casual perambulation through the Duke's famous rose garden became something far more sinister as furtive glances turned into sharp-eyed stares and polite interest transformed into gasps of delicious scandal. The onlookers, trained from birth in the art of the social observation, laid eyes upon the pair frozen in their intimate tableau, a scene that spoke of attraction, affection, and most scandalously of all, genuine emotion, a sight ripe for misinterpretation and perfect for the gossip mills that powered London society. "Well, I do declare," Lady Pembroke remarked with feigned innocence, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that concealed venom, her eyes glinting with the predatory gleam of one who has stumbled upon the most delicious morsel of scandal. Her fan snapped open with a sharp crack as she raised it coquettishly to her lips. "Isn't that our dear Isadora engaged in what appears to be a most intimate conversation with that rather intriguing gentleman?" Mrs. Whitmore, never one to be outdone in matters of social reconnaissance, leaned forward with the eagerness of a hound catching a scent. "The same gentleman who has been seen about the estate with such regularity, I'm told." "How very interesting." Her tone suggested that interesting was perhaps the most charitable description she could manage. "I wonder," Lady Catherine added with theatrical concern, pressing her gloved hand to her heart in a gesture of mock distress, "what his grace would think if he were to witness this rather scandalous display. Such devotion to privacy in a young lady of her standing is most unusual." At the sound of her name being bandied about like a commodity at market, Isadora's heart plummeted as though it had been dropped from the highest tower of the estate. An icy grip of realization washed over her like a winter tide, chilling her to the bone as she understood with perfect clarity that the moment of solace and happiness she had found in James's company was being transformed into a weapon that would be used against her. The gossip would spread through London drawing rooms faster than fire through dry timber. As the cultivated laughter of the ton followed their retreating figures like the ominous rumble of an approaching storm, she turned to James with panic etched across her delicate features. Her eyes, wide with the dawning comprehension of their predicament, met his with an expression of uncertainty and fear. They had just invited a tempest upon themselves that would test not only their love, but their very survival in a society that showed no mercy to those who dared to step outside its rigid boundaries. It was a dreary morning at the estate, the dark clouds brewing above casting a gloomy shadow over Isadora's heart. The leaden sky seemed to press down upon the grounds with an oppressive weight, mirroring the suffocating atmosphere within the ornate walls of her family's sprawling ancestral home. Confined within these gilded chambers, she felt the crushing burden of her situation settling upon her shoulders, like the heavy velvet drapes that adorned the tall windows, blocking out what little light the storm-threatened sky might have offered. Society's expectations loomed large over her every waking moment, a constant and unforgiving reminder that her every gesture, every word, every fleeting expression was scrutinized by the ever-watchful eyes of her family and the influential members of the ton. The weight of her noble birth, once a source of pride, now felt like golden shackles binding her to a predetermined path. As a noblewoman of impeccable breeding and considerable fortune, she possessed certain inescapable responsibilities that tethered her irrevocably to her high station. Yet within the secret depths of her heart, a fierce and uncompromising longing for James burned like a bright and consuming flame that threatened to devour her very soul. The memory of his touch still lingered upon her skin, like the faintest whisper of silk, and his voice echoed through her thoughts with a persistence that both tormented and comforted her. She could recall with vivid clarity the way his eyes had sparkled with mirth during their clandestine meetings, the warmth of his laughter as it filled the hidden corners of the garden where they had stolen precious moments together away from prying eyes. Every day that passed in his absence, she found herself grappling with the stark and painful dichotomy of duty and desire. The noble expectations she had been raised to uphold from her earliest childhood, clashing with devastating force against her burgeoning feelings for the spirited and ambitious James. His laughter still echoed in her mind like a sweet melody that danced through her thoughts with haunting persistence, even as she mechanically prepared to face her family each morning, donning the mask of dutiful daughter that had become her prison. The familiar routine of her days, the endless parade of morning calls, afternoon promenades, and evening entertainments, had become a torturous charade. Each smile she forced felt like a betrayal of her true feelings. Each polite conversation a mockery of the passionate discourse she had shared with James about literature, philosophy, and their dreams for the future. But then, as fate would have it with its cruel and capricious hand, James was abruptly dismissed from his position as estate manager. The dismissal came without warning, delivered with cold formality by her father's steward, who spoke of irregularities and inappropriate conduct that Isadora knew in her heart were merely convenient excuses to remove the threat James posed to their carefully laid plans for her future. His once steady and reassuring presence in her life was plucked away like a delicate flower torn from its vine by an unforgiving wind. The very corridors of the estate seemed to echo with his absence, and she found herself listening for the familiar cadence of his footsteps, the sound of his voice discussing estate matters with the other servants, the glimpse of his tall figure striding across the grounds with purposeful determination. The heartbreak he felt was palpable in their final, stolen moment together in the conservatory, where the scent of jasmine and roses could not mask the bitter taste of their impending separation. His eyes, usually so bright with optimism and gentle humor, had grown dark with pain and resignation. With a heavy heart that seemed to carry the weight of all his shattered dreams, he determined that he must leave everything behind: the security of his position, the familiarity of the estate, and most devastating of all, her, to pursue the ambitious dreams that awaited him beyond the confines of these suffocating societal expectations. This agonizing decision tore the very fabric of their connection, ripping him away from her as if he were an artist's brush slipping from trembling fingers, leaving nothing but a blank canvas in the wake of their heart-wrenching separation. The finality of it struck her like a physical blow, leaving her gasping for breath in the perfumed air of the conservatory. As days turned into weeks with agonizing slowness, Isadora found herself enveloped in a transcendent and all-consuming longing for the man who had ignited her very spirit and awakened passions she had never known existed within her carefully controlled existence. The world around her felt dull and utterly colorless, drained of all vibrancy and joy, each day becoming nothing more than a monotonous reel of tedious social obligations and interminably drawn-out tea parties where idle chatter, gossip masked the deeper, more turbulent emotions that roiled and churned beneath the polished surface of her composure. The elaborate morning rituals of dressing and primping that had once brought her pleasure now felt like preparing for battle. Her lady's maid would arrange her hair with practiced efficiency, but Isadora barely saw her reflection in the ornate mirror, her thoughts constantly drifting to memories of James's fingers brushing against her gloved hand, the way his eyes would light up when she shared her thoughts on the novels she read in secret. She had begun to realize with startling and painful clarity that the more she defied the rigid norms that bound her like invisible chains, the more achingly clear it became that her heart belonged not to the lofty expectations of her family or the demanding requirements of society, but rather to the passionate and remarkably capable man who had dared to touch her soul and awaken her to possibilities she had never imagined. The realization struck her with the force of revelation during a particularly stifling dinner party where she sat surrounded by eligible gentlemen whose conversation revolved around nothing more stimulating than the weather, their horses, and the latest gossip from London. As she smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, she found herself comparing each of them to James. Their lack of genuine passion, their absence of intellectual curiosity, their comfortable acceptance of the world as it was, rather than any desire to improve or change it. In the twilight hours when the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows upon the silk-papered walls of her bedroom, Isadora would find herself drawn to the window seat, where she could gaze out at the moonlit grounds and ponder the momentous choices that lay before her, like diverging paths in a dark forest. She envisioned with increasing clarity a path paved with defiance and courage, where her happiness was not dictated by the suffocating demands of conventionality, but rather by the brave and audacious choice to heed the yearnings of her heart, regardless of the consequences. As the soft scent of evening rain intermingled with the musty, comforting aroma of old leather-bound books in the library, where she spent her solitary hours, she found unexpected solace in this dawning realization. The knowledge that true joy and fulfillment lay not in dutiful compliance, but in her courageous pursuit of love and personal autonomy sent shivers of both fear and excitement down her spine, igniting a fierce and unshakable determination within her that grew stronger with each passing day. It was during one of these long, contemplative evenings, as autumn rain drummed against the diamond-paned windows, that Isadora stumbled upon something unexpected. A hidden talent, a passion for dance that had lain dormant beneath layers of rigid expectation and stifling propriety, like a butterfly waiting to emerge from its chrysalis. The discovery came quite by accident as she found herself moving to the rhythm of a waltz that drifted up from the music room below, where her younger sister practiced her scales with mechanical precision. As she began to twirl and leap across the elegantly tiled floor of her spacious chamber, the rustle of her silk skirt seemed to mirror the exhilaration that bubbled up inside her like champagne, effervescent and intoxicating. Each graceful movement felt like a step closer to the freedom she craved, each spinning twirl an act of rebellion against the stifling strictures of her carefully ordered existence. Her body seemed to remember movements she had never learned, as if the music had unlocked something essential within her that had been waiting for this moment of release. This newfound passion burgeoned within her like an untamed fire, growing stronger and more compelling with each secret practice session. Soon the anticipation of the upcoming autumn ball, the social event of the season that would draw the most influential families from across the county, became the catalyst for a decision that would change everything. It would be the perfect opportunity to showcase her talent in a most audacious act of defiance, one that would undoubtedly capture the attention of every member of the ton present, shining a brilliant spotlight upon her rebellion against society's constraining expectations. The mere thought of performing publicly, of allowing her true self to emerge before the assembled company, sent waves of exhilaration coursing through her veins like liquid fire. The anticipation intertwined dangerously with the persistent longing for James, who lingered in the back of her mind like a beloved ghost, his memory urging her forward toward whatever fate awaited her, whispering that perhaps, just perhaps, such an act of courage might somehow bring him back to her. As the grand ball unfolded within the opulent ballroom of Lord Harrington's magnificent estate, the very air itself seemed to shimmer with anticipation and romance. The sweet, heady scent of jasmine wound its way through the vast space, mingling with the warm, inviting aroma of freshly polished mahogany and the subtle fragrance of beeswax that emanated from hundreds of flickering candles. Crystal chandeliers of extraordinary grandeur hung suspended from the ornately decorated ceiling, their countless flames casting a soft, golden light that danced and played upon the lustrous silk and gleaming satin of the numerous elegant gowns that swirled about the marble floor like exotic flowers in a gentle breeze. The rustle of expensive fabrics created a symphony of whispers as ladies glided past in their finery, their melodious laughter ringing out like delicate silver bells in the warm evening air. Gentlemen in their finest evening wear moved with practiced grace between the dancers, their polished boots clicking softly against the pristine floor that reflected the chandelier's warm glow like a mirror of liquid gold. It was into this enchanted scene that Isadora stepped forward from the shadowed edges of the grand hall, where she had been waiting with trembling hands clasped before her. Her heart raced with a tumultuous mixture of excitement and trepidation, each beat echoing in her ears like the rhythm of a distant drum. She wore a stunning gown of deep emerald green that had been crafted by London's finest modiste, its luxurious fabric clinging gracefully to her slender form and shimmering like the surface of a tranquil mountain lake kissed by moonlight. The bodice was adorned with delicate pearls that caught the candlelight with each breath she took, while the skirt fell in elegant folds that whispered secrets with every step. Her cheeks glowed with a natural flush of rose, brought on by both nervousness and the warmth of the crowded ballroom. As she took her place at the front of the assembled guests and began to sing, every conversation ceased, every fan stopped its gentle waving, and every eye in the room fell upon her with rapt attention. Her voice, rich and hauntingly emotive, overflowed with a passion that seemed to spring from the very depths of her soul, pulling the captivated audience into her deep melodic embrace, like sailors drawn to a siren's call. The notes soared and dipped with masterful control, each phrase painted with such emotion that grown men felt tears prick at their eyes while ladies pressed lace handkerchiefs to their hearts. The very walls of the ballroom seemed to vibrate with the power of her performance, as if the ancient stones themselves were moved by the beauty of her song. Among the spellbound crowd stood the Duke of Montrose, his usually stern and haughty demeanor noticeably softened by the intoxicating beauty of her performance. His dark eyes, normally so calculating and cold, now reflected something altogether different, a vulnerability he had not felt since his youth. All at once, like lightning illuminating a stormy sky, he was struck by the profound realization that love and genuine happiness held far greater value than the cold, lonely comfort of his lofty social status. The walls he had built around his heart over years of rigid propriety began to crumble as he listened, each note chipping away at his carefully constructed facade. A fleeting glance was exchanged between performer and patron, a silent acknowledgement of the truth that sang through the very fibers of the room and touched every soul present. The human heart yearns for connection that transcends the artificial barriers of rank and circumstance. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in the Duke's understanding of what truly mattered in life. Just then, as though summoned by the very hand of fate itself, James made his dramatic entrance as an unexpected guest to the evening's festivities. His return to society, fueled by his newfound artistic connections and his desperate desire to seize this precious moment, felt almost surreal, like stepping from one world into another entirely. The warm flicker of candlelight caught the auburn highlights in his hair as he stepped confidently into the hall, and Isadora's breath caught in her throat at the magnificent sight of him, standing tall and devastatingly handsome amidst the sea of aristocratic elegance that surrounded him. He wore evening clothes that, while perhaps not as costly as those of the titled gentlemen around him, fit his frame perfectly and spoke of quiet dignity and refined taste. His eyes swept the room with purpose, searching through the crowd of silk and jewels until his gaze landed upon Isadora. In that instant, all else faded into insignificance. The chattering voices, the rustle of gowns, the soft music of the string quartet. Everything dissolved except for the vision of the woman he loved, radiant in her emerald gown and glowing with the aftermath of her triumphant performance. With the final strains of music rising toward the painted ceiling and a sense of destiny swirling about them like invisible threads, James could no longer remain a mere spectator to her shining brilliance. The very air between them seemed charged with electricity, drawing him forward as surely as a compass needle seeks true north. He excused himself politely from the small group of gentlemen with whom he had been conversing and made his determined way through the throng toward the delicate figure who still stood poised where her makeshift stage had been, his heart racing with an anticipation so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. As the final notes of her song faded into reverent whispers and then blessed silence, the entire room erupted into thunderous applause. Gloved hands clapped enthusiastically, voices called out their appreciation, and fans fluttered in approval. Yet for Isadora and James, all that seemed to exist in that moment was the shared gravity of their feelings, pulling them together across the crowded room like two stars caught in each other's orbit. "Isadora," James murmured as he reached her side, his voice barely audible above the continuing applause. He reached for her gloved hand with infinite tenderness, his fingers trembling slightly as they found hers. "I had to see you tonight. I could not stay away. The entire world feels hollow and meaningless without you by my side." Startled by his sudden appearance, yet filled with joy so pure it threatened to overwhelm her, Isadora raised her luminous gaze to meet his. Her dark eyes, still bright with the emotion of her performance, now sparkled with unshed tears of happiness. "James," she breathed, her voice catching with emotion. "I feared I had lost you forever to the cruel circumstances that seemed determined to keep us apart. This entire evening feels like the most wonderful dream. And you are the most wondrous part of it all." Understanding the need for discretion in such a public setting, they found a discreet alcove tucked away behind a marble pillar, adorned with trailing ivy and softly lit by a single candelabra. Here, away from the curious eyes and wagging tongues of society's most watchful members, they could speak freely, unburdened by the constant weight of judgment and expectation. Their voices remained low and intimate, yet filled with an urgency that spoke of hearts too long separated, as they finally gave voice to the depth of their affection and began binding their hearts together with whispered promises and declarations of love. In that dimly lit corner of the grand ballroom, shielded from the musical revelry and social posturing that continued around them, they spoke earnestly of their dreams and hopes. They painted pictures with words of a future where the rigid constraints of society would be mere whispers in the background of their lives, allowing them the precious freedom to love without barriers or fear. Their spirits finally unconfined, and their hearts free to soar as high as Isadora's voice had carried that very evening. As the festivities gradually began to wind down and guests started to take their leave, the Duke of Montrose remained, observing the couple from his position across the ballroom. Something profound was stirring within his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in decades of carefully controlled existence. His heart, once so immutably bound by tradition and years of staunch allegiance to the rigid hierarchy of class, began to thaw in the undeniable warmth of witnessing Isadora and James's pure and honest bond. Perhaps he found himself musing with growing wonder. He could finally entertain the revolutionary notion that love was not something to be systematically snuffed out in favor of social stature and cold propriety. "If only I could fully understand that which my heart has so long denied," he thought with a wistfulness that surprised him. The weight of his title, his responsibilities, and his family's expectations had pressed upon him for so many years that he had nearly forgotten what it felt like to contemplate happiness for its own sake. At long last, gathering his courage like armor around him, the Duke approached Isadora and James in their secluded corner. The weight of his authority and centuries of aristocratic tradition sat heavy upon his shoulders. Yet he felt something lighter beginning to take root in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or the first stirrings of wisdom that comes only with genuine understanding. "Miss Isadora," he began, his voice carrying its usual firmness, yet noticeably softened by the realization that had been growing within him throughout the evening. "I have observed your performance tonight, and I have witnessed something I cannot deny or dismiss. I see your passion, your talent, and the genuine happiness you find in this young man's company. I cannot deny their power any longer, nor should I attempt to do so." He paused, drawing a deep breath that seemed to carry away years of rigid thinking. "You have every right to pursue your own happiness, wherever that path may lead you." Isadora's eyes widened in complete disbelief, her hand instinctively finding James's arm for support. Slowly, wonderfully, her expression transformed as hope began to sparkle in her gaze like stars emerging at twilight. James, standing protectively close by her side, barely dared to breathe, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter this miraculous moment like fragile glass. It felt as though something momentous and irreversible had shifted in the very fabric of their lives, as if the universe itself had quietly rearranged its priorities. The impossible had become possible, the forbidden had been granted permission, and love had triumphed over the cold calculations of society. With that unprecedented endorsement from one of society's most powerful figures, the path to a bright and promising future unfurled before Isadora and James like a golden carpet leading toward happiness. Their hearts, so recently heavy with despair, now blazed with infinite possibilities and the sweet promise of dreams finally within reach. As the last guest departed and the candles began to burn low in their sconces, the story reached its hopeful crescendo, with plans of love and a life together shimmering before them like bright stars against the vast night sky, a beautiful and eternal testament to the enduring, transformative power of love that refuses to be constrained by the artificial boundaries of society. If you enjoyed this free Regency romance story, please like, comment, and share Rose Bloom love stories with someone who loves historical romance. Subscribe for more candlelit love stories, and I'll see you in the next one.